Okay, welcome to the CA2VES webinar series. This webinar is on digital learning tools in personalized learning. And I am Stephen Cotton, and I'm joined by Jeff Bertrand. Just a couple of housekeeping details at the beginning. We'd like to ask you to please post your questions in the Q&A box that you can find in the toolbar on Zoom. Because we've disabled the voice and video options for all the participants. And so we will address your questions either in text or probably more likely live at the end of each section, or if you have further questions at the end of the webinar. Thanks for helping us out with that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Digital learning tools in personalized learning. And we'll just introduce ourselves real quick. I'm Stephen Cotton on the right-hand side. I'm the Instructional Design Coordinator for Clemson, for CA2VES. For the Clemson University Center for Workforce Development as well. And Jeff Bertrand is our virtual reality lead and project manager. And he's going to be helping us understand how to use virtual and augmented reality as a digital learning tool for personalized learning. So what are we going to learn about today? We want to learn about what is personalized learning. There are a lot of definitions out there. We want to talk about how you can use digital tools to support personalized learning, and then focus on one of those digital tools in particular, virtual reality and augmented reality, and find out what we can do to use those tools to support personalized learning. And then we have some questions and answer opportunities for you at the end of each section, as well as at the end of the webinar. Just a little bit about our organization. We are CA2VES, or the Center for Aviation and Automotive Technology Education, using virtual e-schools. And our primary focus is on supporting workforce development here in the upstate of South Carolina, as well as throughout the region and the United States. And we focus on doing that in 4 key areas: through digital learning tools, through our career pathways and college affordability tracks, through our K-12 STEM initiatives, and through our research advocacy and networking that we do throughout at conferences throughout the United States. So let's focus on the definition of personalized learning. You may be a little fuzzy about what that is or what it means, and so let's take a look at that because we have to kind of know what it is before we can understand how to use digital tools to support it. So what is personalized learning? Everyone has their own definition, and they all differ a little bit. But as we talk about what personalized learning is, think about what you can do to personalize your particular learning environment. So whatever your capacity is as an educator or an instructor, or as someone who is interested in personalized learning, what's something that you can do? Is there a tool that you can take away from this webinar that you can add to your bag of tricks and make your learning environment just a little bit more personal and better for your students? As you think about comments or questions for us, please again post those in the Q&A window. So a definition, we have to know what it is before we can address how to support it. So a definition for individualized learning could be a number of things. I have one there from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at the bottom of the screen, but it usually encompasses 4 key areas. Even though people will list a lot of different things, they'll talk and describe it in many different ways. It usually is about the individual student. It's about the competency of that student and mastery learning. It heavily relies usually on technology, though it doesn't have to support it. And it's also evaluative. And that doesn't mean we test students a lot. It just means that we use the data that students accumulate to adjust their learning environment and learning or testing environment to either make it easier or more difficult, or to give more personalized and individualized feedback. So that's really what it is. It's those kinds of things. We have that great definition at the bottom: accelerating student learning by tailoring the instructional environment to address individual needs, skills, and interests. And that's a pretty good definition for what personalized learning is. We're going to take a look at each of these 4 key areas in a little bit more detail, and then we'll talk about the digital learning tools. that we need to address. So it's an individual process. It's an individual process. So it's all about the individual. So that means it's personalized, it's flexible, and it's student oriented. So when we mean individual, we mean that you take the learning and the content that you have and you try to adjust it to meet the individual needs of the students. Every student that comes into a learning environment is going to have is going to be different. They're going to bring different knowledge with them, different skill levels, and there's going to be gaps in that need to be addressed before they can proceed in your class or in your learning situation. So tailoring the learning to the individual needs of the student is one of the major components of personalized learning. And so we try to address that in a number of different ways. Either through, and it can also be by adapting the content or prompting the learners to explain how they've learned in an activity, giving personalized feedback and scaffolding, or allowing or adjusting the pace of the class based on what the student needs. These are all ways that you can personalize and make the learning environment more individual. It's also about student choice and their role in learning. We have been following a learning model where the student is much more passive in what they get to say they're going to learn, and that's often those choices are made for them either by the teacher or by the administration or by some other person or entity and so with personalized learning, we try to give them a lot more agency in their learning and a role in what they're going to learn. And that a lot of times comes through giving them choices in their learning. So we try to provide choices in the type of thing, the way they're going to learn. Like, what is the learning mode or format going to be? Maybe on what they learn. Is there a way that we can allow choice in the interest that they follow? There could be one topic, but maybe there are a couple of subtopics that a student can specialize in or learn in more depth. And that provides them a little more choice in the learning. And this is valuable in part because it makes the learning more engaging and interesting to the student. And when a student is engaged and interested, research shows that they're going to learn, the learning is going to be much more effective for them, and they're going to get more out of the learning process. Another way that we can provide a bigger role for the student is to make the content more interactive, make it more about active learning. So the more we can limit the amount of passive learning in reading or in lectures and make it more about a student engaging learning in an activity within a group or individually, the more active this learning can be and the more engaging it can be. So that's one of the things we try to do with personalized learning. Personalized learning is also technological. One of the big drivers of personalized learning is the fact that we have had a lot of advances in technology that allow us to personalize learning as never before. A lot of it is just taking away the amount of time it would take to personalize learning for each student. If you have a class of 30 or 100, or 100 students taking a course, it's really difficult to make that learning individual for each and every one of those students. But if you can track their activities as they're involved in the digital learning environment or in an online course, you can there's a lot of new software and analytic software that can help you track that, provide better feedback to your students. And so the data sharing and analytic capability of as well as new learning tools like augmented reality and virtual reality, these are all really exciting changes in education and are allowing us to make a lot of changes in the way we personalize learning. Personalized learning is also evaluative. When I say evaluative, it doesn't mean that we're testing students, but it does mean that we're taking the data collection or the data that they generate when they are using digital courseware or online courses, and we're using that to help inform what they're doing. Maybe it can help us kind of red flag a student who maybe isn't doing well in a course, instead of waiting until the end of the semester or at midterms when a student might be failing the course. We can intervene at a much earlier date and get them the help that they need. It could be providing individualized feedback based on their performance in the course. Or, and there's a lot of new things that are being developed. A lot of the activity and adaptive curriculum that we're seeing, and I'll explain that in a moment, is happening in K-12, but there are also changes happening in the higher education environment as well. And adaptive learning and curriculum is about using the performance of the student and using algorithms based on what they're doing in order to adjust the content or maybe the questions that they're being asked to make it either more challenging or a little bit easier based on what they know and what they're able to do. So that's how it's evaluative. And this is all supported by research. There has been a lot of research done on student outcomes and how we can improve those outcomes. And a lot of it is centered around student and teacher interactions and how we can make those more positive. It's about organizing the learning environment to make it better for students to learn. It's about making it engaging and interesting and challenging. And so all of that research about student outcomes really supports a lot of the things that personalized learning is also advocating. It's also supported by a lot of the research that has been done in the Universal Design for Learning and their guidelines about engagement and representation and action and expression. The research on personalized learning and the outcomes that students show based on their experience in that kind of learning environment is pretty limited. We don't have a lot of research yet on informing us on what effect that has on student outcomes yet. So there's a lot of work to be done there. So but the research that's already been done in general education does seem to support that this is a really good model to follow whenever possible. And then some other general advantages other than student outcomes is that, as you can see there in the box on the left-hand side, as well as the chart on the right. In higher education, of course, we all know that tuition costs are rising. We also know that retention rates in universities and colleges and community colleges and technical colleges are fairly low. And to raise those, colleges are looking for ways to do that. And so personalized learning and making learning in higher education more personal could go a long way towards doing that. Students who are engaged in this kind of learning are more interested, they're more engaged, and they're more apt to stick it out and stay another semester, finish their degree than students who are in a more traditional learning environment and are struggling because that learning environment is not working for them. It can improve the services of the university, give students higher grades. These are all things that are win-win for universities and colleges in higher education. It also makes learning a little bit more equitable and accessible. Instead of paying the high costs of learning on a college campus, students can engage in learning remotely and in a number of other different ways. It's a much more flexible type of learning platform. And this allows a wider range of students to get access to high quality learning. All right, so we'll pause here for a moment in our webinar. We asked the question about how you can use personalized learning in your educational environment. We're going to take a moment to look at the questions and see if you folks have any questions for us about that first part about what personalized learning is, or any comments you have about how you can use that in your own educational context. All right, well, I don't see any activity in the Q&A, so please make sure if you do have questions that the Q&A can be accessed by going up to the bar in the Zoom software, and you should, if you just go to the top of your screen, it should drop down and you should be able to access the Q&A that way. Please make sure that you add questions as we go if something occurs to you, but we'll go ahead and move on to the, oh, I think we do have one question, so we'll go ahead and address that right now. We have one question that a person asks. They say, how can personalized learning be incorporated with extended learning opportunities? So I'm not sure what they mean by extended learning opportunities. So I was wondering if the person who asked that question, could they give us a little more information about that, or can someone perhaps tell us what that might mean, extended learning opportunities? Tell you what, I will do a little research on that, and I will come back to that question at the end of our webinar and see if I can address your question there. And if not, we can have a further conversation over email and see if we can help you with that question. That's a really interesting question. Just not sure what we mean by extended learning. There's another question here. Is personalized learning a good fit in K-12 as well? It is, yes. And I actually, a lot of the work being done in personalized learning is really being done at the K-12 level. Higher education is just beginning to take notice and start talking about personalized learning in higher education. I thought since that our audience today would be more folks from the higher education, so I geared my talk towards those folks. But everything that we're talking about today is all very relevant at K-12 as well. So that's a really good question. But yes, that's where a lot of the exciting work in personalized learning is being done right now. All right, great questions. Thank you for participating and asking those. We'll go ahead and continue. Please keep posting your questions in the Q&A box. And let's take a look at some of these digital tools that we can use to support personalized learning. All right, so our focus question for this section is what digital learning tool would be most helpful in your educational setting? So again, please post responses in the Q&A window. And again, you're not limited to that focus question. You can ask any question about personalized learning that you would like to ask, and we will do our best to answer those. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at these digital learning tools. Now, I mentioned that technology is the big driver, and this has caused a huge resurgence in personalized learning. There was interest a few years back, and then it just was really difficult to implement. People discovered that personalized learning can also be a huge commitment in time. And so it just wasn't feasible. But we have a lot of really exciting tools now that allow us to personalize our learning that we haven't had in the past. And what it does is it allows us to give greater access, which I mentioned earlier. It allows our education environments to be more engaging, which makes students more interested in learning, keeps them in school longer, and it also makes the learning more efficient. So instructors and students and parents can all track what their students are doing or what you are doing as a student, and see where you need to adjust if there's a weakness in your in what you know or what you're learning, and get help or study that particular area a little bit more, or you can find a way to get someone, get that explained in a better way. So there's a lot of things that are driving this and bringing this resurgence, and the technology is part of it. So I just wanted to mention that in general here. We'll talk a little bit more about those technology tools as we go. So one of the most exciting things that's happening is the growth in data and the ability to collect data and share that data and analyze it. So analytics software that helps you read what the numbers and the information is saying about student progress and what they're doing. There are a lot of things that are open. There are a lot of open educational resources as far as learning management systems, digital courseware that track data, some more than others. Most learning management systems have some kind of data collection and analytics software that allow you to see what students are doing, some more sophisticated than others. A lot of them have plugins that you can use, third-party applications as well. And these improved technology systems are really exciting because they allow us to help students as never before. And again, you can intervene if a student is not doing well, and you don't wait until there is a capture point for grades when things maybe have progressed too far to be of help. You can intervene sooner, and that's even can be automated, and a red flag can go up if a student is not performing well, and the data shows that, red flags it, and then that can be a message that goes out to the instructor, the parents, or even the student themselves. So it's not just up to checking it, sometimes that can be automated. Another digital tool that is really exciting is digital learning or digital courseware or online software and courses. And this is exciting because this digital tool makes learning and high quality learning more accessible to a greater number of people. We don't have to pay college tuition and go on campus and take a course. We can learn that course online in the comfort of our own home through our computer. If we can't afford a computer, more and more students are finishing at least some activities and coursework in digital courseware or online through their own smartphone. And so this is making learning more accessible. It can be done anywhere. We don't have to be in a classroom face-to-face with the instructor. And so this is a very exciting thing, and it really fits well with personalized learning because it's flexible. It allows people to access education when and where they want. So this is an exciting a way that you can gear your learning environment to make it more accessible to people. Interactive courseware. The courseware that's being developed now, and a lot of it is very, very new, but they are trying to make it more reactive to what a learner is doing. And as the learner is engaging in activities and participating in the course, they are creating data. That data then can be collected, analyzed, and turned into tables or charts, or a way that you can then see what the progress is. This allows instructors to provide more individualized feedback, and so they can use the student's performance in a particular course to give them feedback on how they can improve their learning. So this is an exciting tool that a lot of learning management systems and digital courseware have already included in their design, or sometimes you can include them through a third-party application. And a lot of it is based on algorithms that, based on the data that are collected, as well as what they call predictive data. So based on what the student has already done, the courseware, the analytics software, can then predict what the student will do in the future. And that's especially helpful if we need to catch a student before they get to the point where they can't pass a course. Another great digital tool that supports personalized learning is interactive courseware. And with interactive, I already mentioned interactive courseware. Let's go on to virtual reality and augmented reality. Now, I'm not going to steal Jeff's thunder here. He's going to go into a lot more detail about this, but I just wanted to mention something that I've done and kind of as an example. And it's something I found as well that some people are doing with augmented reality in the Netherlands. So with the virtual reality, augmented reality, there are a lot of great ways to apply this to personalized learning. And one thing that we did with our courses with workforce development is we had a course on aircraft maintenance, and one of the topics was tube bending and how to do that. And so we approached it in 3 different ways. We created a knowledge video, a video lecture about how to bend a tube. We then had a demonstration video, so the instructor demonstrated. He had created the tubing assembly in front of the camera, showed the tools, did it all right there, so that you could actually observe the whole process. And then we created a virtual reality simulation for students to practice that. This all then leading up to eventually the students will need to perform a successful tube bending and a tube assembly in front of an instructor in order to master that section of learning and progress to the next course. So we approached it from very traditional methods in some cases, and then used new digital tools with the virtual reality, and all three being used together to kind of scaffold that learning process. So the student is not walking into a lab where they have to pass a critical skill without having any practice beforehand. The picture at the bottom there shows the anatomy, kind of a cartoon anatomy of a foot. And you can see the person with the glasses there trying to manipulate that foot. What this software does is augmented reality. It's not virtual reality. And so that's kind of like the Pokemon Go that was popular a year or so ago. And it overlays an image in the real world. And what this software does is it mimics the movement of your own foot. And so you can learn about the anatomy of the foot and you can move it around and it mimics your movement. And so that's a great tool for people in the medical field and in nursing and learning anatomy. All right, some other learning tools very quickly before I turn this over to Jeff. Games and gamification are also great ways to engage learners and make the learning more interesting, as well as make provide another way to access learning. Sometimes the learning game itself is the curriculum. In other ways, you can apply the principles of gaming to any course and gamify it, as we say. So you apply the game elements, whether it's a leaderboard that you can see at the top of the right-hand top of the screen, or badges, and I'll talk more about badges in the next slide. You can see where someone has earned an investing in knowledge or a hungry for knowledge badge. And also providing opportunities for students to practice learning and then have the freedom to fail and then try again. So at Educate Workforce, on all of our courseware, we all of the activity questions that students use following an instructional video or activity all provide multiple attempts to get correct. So you can see there at the bottom that you have questions, and then there are 3 different answers. 2 of them are incorrect, they have the red X, and 1 of them is green. And so the student can check to see if they're correct, and if they're not, they can reset those questions and try again, and they can even choose to show the answer if they need further help. And this is all going towards helping the student interact with the information, practice that, and then move on to the next. So it's a little piece of mastery learning that we've embedded in our courseware. Here we have some examples of badging, which are great motivation tools. It seems like a very simple thing to have a little picture that says you've accomplished something, but it is a powerful motivation tool for any person of any age, and it works really well in educational courses too. And you can see some examples over there on the left. Some types of badging can even be recognized by employers. They can be stored in digital storage like Mozilla Backpack. So they actually can turn out to be actual credentials that can help students when they are looking for jobs. So badging is a great motivation tool, and it helps also chunk the learning into smaller pieces that the students have to master before earning their badge and moving on to the next thing. So it all can be incorporated into a lot of these other types of ideas that we've been talking about. Just a quick overview of some other digital tools that you can use in personalized learning in your courses. I mentioned personalized feedback tools a little earlier. I'm just going to reiterate them here. There's a lot of work being done on these. They're still very, very new and being tested, but keep your eye out for those and definitely utilize them when they become more available. Proctoring apps are pretty standard. They've been around a while for online courses that need to have tests that prove that the person taking the test is actually that person. Discussion threads are all a standard, been around a while, but are very great tools for online and digital learning. A Lightboard video, when you can see on the top of the screen there an example of Lightboard video. And that is a type of instructional video that we've recorded and allows the instructor to write on a screen and face the digital audience instead of having to turn away and write on a whiteboard. You can also project your images and graphics on the other side, and so you have the video of the instructor with the graphics that he or she can interact with, and then they can also write out formulas, do calculations, draw to illustrate an idea. So it's a really effective tool. Ebooks, you can see an example there in the bottom of the screen. It's one of our ebooks that we use in one of our courses. An old digital tool, it's been around a while, but very effective and useful for digital learning. Now, with all these digital tools and about this personalized learning and how we're trying to make it individualized for the student, it's kind of difficult to do all of that if you've got a teacher standing up at the front of the classroom and all of the students are seated in rows, in desks. So a lot of people are beginning to talk about how we need to imagine the teacher role differently. So if you've heard about blended learning or the flipped classroom, and so reimagining the teacher role as more of a coach or a manager or an advisor who sets up the learning and the learning tools and learning environment, but the students are actually doing the instruction for themselves. And being checked on by the instructor, of course. So we need to think maybe about new learning models and how do you do learning. And you can see a classroom there organized in a little bit different way than what we are traditionally used to. So having different movable furniture in different kinds of learning spaces, doing group learning, active learning and based on activities and projects rather than on reading and text and and lectures. Those all have a place and can be used very effectively, but also by having a classroom organized like the picture on the left-hand side, you can more easily utilize a lot of these digital tools that we've been talking about. So this alternative classroom design. And that kind of brings us to redefining higher education and how we think about that. We've got a new breed of students coming in, and there are more students coming to higher education, many of them lacking skills, limited resources, and they need to be very efficient about their learning. They may need assistance, and it's kind of our responsibility as higher education instructors to meet the students where they are and be kind of a student-ready college rather than a college-ready student. And so personalized learning and kind of checking on what students' skills are and addressing those needs can be really important tools to kind of meet students where and make them more successful. This all goes towards that retention rate that we talked about earlier and making students more successful. And then also thinking as universities doing more and being more explicit in how we create career pathways and connections to the job market, so that students, when they graduate, have a much more firm path to a job and earning potential. All right, we'll pause here again for any questions that you might have about digital learning tools and how to use those. I'm going to take a look at the screen here and see if there's anything that's popped up. All right, we have a question. What tools would this include? I'm not sure the context there other than digital learning tools. If that person maybe could write a little more explanation about what tools they're referring to. Maybe she wrote that question before I got into digital learning tools, or maybe she's talking about a particular tool I was discussing. There's another question. Is there research around the use of simulations in personalized learning? Is this type of digital tool more effective than others? Is there research around the simulations in personalized learning? I don't know if this person is asking about a simulated personalized learning environment or in research into that, or if they're talking about virtual reality simulations. So we'll have to follow up in writing and see if we can find out what they're talking about there. But in general, if we're talking about personalized learning, it is a very effective tool. But like I said, there's a lot of research to be done on how how effective it is and how much it affects student outcomes. Okay, virtual reality simulation. All right, and so Jeff is going to talk about virtual reality simulations in just a moment. So the person who wrote about, is there research around the use of virtual reality simulations and personalized learning? Perhaps he can talk a little bit about that. But again, the personalized learning environment is very, very new, but I think Jeff has done some research in virtual reality, and so he can talk a little bit about some personal research that he's done there. All right, we're going to go ahead and get into virtual reality if there aren't any other questions right now. And Jeff's going to take over for us and talk about virtual and augmented realities in this next section.
All right, hi everyone. This is Jeff Bertrand with CA2VES. I'm the VR project manager, and I'll talk a little bit about our VR simulations and how it relates to personalized learning. So the question I'd like you to focus on for this segment is, can you think of any additional examples of incorporating personalized learning in a virtual simulation? I'll give a couple examples that we've been thinking about incorporating, but I'd like to see if you could come up with some ideas as well as I go along. So let's start out with a little bit of background information on what virtual and augmented reality is. So virtual reality is the use of interactive 3D graphics to simulate a scenario. And I think the key advantage of VR is its interactivity. So students are actively engaged in the content. They're not passively listening to a lecture. And they can make mistakes in the VR simulation without harming equipment or other people. And they can repeat the simulations as much as they want, and also get immediate feedback on how well they're performing in the simulations. And VR is generally classified into 3 different categories, including desktop, immersive, and augmented. So in desktop VR, the students can access the VR simulations usually through a web browser, and they don't need any special equipment, so they can just run it on their own computers. They usually just need a keyboard and mouse to interact with the simulations. So this allows for wide distribution, for wide audience reach. And for immersive VR, this is where users are wearing a headset usually with tracked controllers. And this is what people usually think of when somebody says VR. And this allows users to perform natural interactions because a keyboard and mouse usually wouldn't mimic how you would perform the same actions in the real world. The actions would be abstracted. But with immersive VR, you can perform the actual actions that you would in the real world. And with augmented reality, here there's the use of graphics to overlay information onto real objects. So you're not fully immersed in the simulation. You can still see your surroundings, but important information is given to you directly onto physical objects. And I'll give you an example here in a little bit. So there's aspects of personalized learning that are inherent in VR. So as I mentioned, the interactivity is probably the most important because users are actively engaged in the content. The pace of learning can also be adjusted. So the way we incorporate that is through scaffolded learning, and I'll talk about that next. And users can interact with the content whenever and wherever they like, for desktop VR simulations at least. And most of our CA2VES simulations are desktop based. And again, they receive instant feedback. They don't have to wait for an instructor to grade them. And we can also collect analytics on how well users are performing the tasks. And we can then generate profiles that will guide the user through the appropriate content. So for scaffolded learning, this is where a lot of instruction is initially given to the user at the beginning of a simulation. But as they become more proficient in a skill, the instruction is reduced over time. And the way we do that in our simulation is we usually divide our simulations into an introduction, a guided practice, and an exercise phase. The introduction gives the user some background information on how to perform a task. So for instance, on the calipers here, it tells users how to interpret the vernier scale. And during the guided practice phase, the user is taken step by step through the process of the procedure. And then once they are comfortable with the procedure, they could go on to the open exercise phase that'll test how well they learned the content from the guided practice phase. So here's a couple examples of how we can further incorporate personalized learning into our VR simulations. So on the right, we have an image of our manufacturing safety simulation. And the goal here is for students to walk around this assembly line environment and try to tag as many safety infringements as possible within a certain amount of time. And ways that we could enhance the simulation is we can have it so that it recognizes what hazards the students are missing and point them into the right direction on how to identify those specific hazards. So for instance, if they keep missing the machine guard hazards, the simulation could take them to the appropriate material for that. Also, we could increase the difficulty of the simulation, so we could increase the amount of hazards or hazard categories, and even make more ambiguous hazards to make it tougher. And we could also make it easier too if students are finding all the hazards they can within a certain amount of time. So this is an example of how we can adapt the simulation to the user. And every time the simulation, the hazards in the simulation are randomly generated. So if you repeat this simulation, you can't just memorize where things are. They'll be in a different place. And so here's an example of augmented reality. So on the right, the user is using Google Glass, and this is projecting a little screen in the top right of their vision. And what they can do with Google Glass is actually call up a supervisor, and it could give them personalized information on how to complete a task. And also, this allows for hands-free access to information. So we can have an instruction list at the top where users can just go through and do each one individually. And so for enhancing personalized learning in VR, what we plan on doing is using machine learning and AI techniques to automatically identify strengths and weaknesses in the user. So kind of like what I mentioned in the assembly line environment. And this would be able to adapt the content accordingly to how well the users are performing the task and if they're getting all the information correctly. And so there hasn't actually been a lot of research that I've been able to find on personalized learning in VR. So I think this would be a very rich field for future study. And so this is what we're going to be focusing on in our next round of simulations. Okay, coming back to the question, can you think of any additional examples of incorporating personalized learning in virtual simulations? And I'd like to see if you have any ideas or if you have any questions for me or Stephen. And I'll turn it over here.
Just coming back to some of the questions in the chat box, I think there was a question about the extended learning opportunities, and I think Michelle tried to help address that. Thank you, Michelle. So yeah, I think extended opportunities, if you're talking about anything that is, I think, extended learning opportunities or anything that happens outside of the classroom, I think they are a great way to personalize learning. So instead of everyone doing the same activity like you would on a field trip, right? We all go on the field trip. To personalize that, you maybe could have different field trips that students go on. Not always feasible in the K-12 environment, but if you are in higher education and you have a, perhaps you have some kind of outside learning opportunity that you want students to engage in as a part of your course, then you could personalize that and allow students to do one that would fit their needs and their learning needs. So I think that's a great way to personalize learning. Fantastic, actually. And there was another question in the Q&A. Someone asked about immersive learning environment, if that could help students learn a topic better. And actually, if I understand immersive learning correctly, that's where you have a real intensive course in a particular topic. I think it's really popular with IT learning, and a lot of coding, like coding boot camps, have been established as kind of immersive learning, where you learn in depth in a short amount of time. And though that would be in an immersive learning environment that you would, personalized learning would just be personalizing it to the needs of the student. So immersive learning environments aren't necessarily personalized, but they can be, depending on how the instructor sets it up. And I'm not sure what research there is. I mean, I know these are really popular. I'm not sure how much research there is about how effective they are as opposed to something that's a little more slower paced. But some students learn really well in that environment, and they can do well. Some students require a slower pace, and so it would really be dependent on the student and their learning abilities. Let me see. Oh, there's one other question about the challenges that a VR developer would face to build a personalized adaptive learning scenario. Yes, definitely there are challenges. And one of them with adaptive learning would be if you're trying to create a digital courseware that provides multiple paths in the learning environment, or in virtual reality, where you're trying to set up almost like a story mode, where students, depending on their choices, are going to have a different learning path than others. That can become very, very complex very, very quickly. And so, yeah, at some point you have to say, well, we can't address everything, and you have to limit the number of choices. So the complexity of that is definitely challenging, but there's a lot of tools that they've created, and algorithms and other types of things that can help make that a little more feasible than it has been in the past. But definitely a very challenging, one of the challenges in personalized learning, for sure. All right, are there any other questions? We seem to have gone 2 tracks with the questions, which is totally fine. We have some in the chat box and then some in the Q&A, and that. So if you're looking for some of the questions I was asking and couldn't find them in one of those 2 places, go to the other one, because that's where that will be. We will provide a link to the recording for all the participants, so that you can go back and watch this again at your leisure if you want to. And we'll also have the Q&A sessions available as well, so that you can access those. Once again, thank you again for joining us, and in our quick look at personalized learning. And I hope that you are excited to try one of these ideas in your learning context, or share it with someone who you think could benefit as well. Thanks again. Oh, I got a couple more questions. Sorry, as I was signing off, they keep coming in, so I was closing off too quickly. Let me address the ones in the Q&A, and then I'll come back to the chat room. There's a question by Zach Trabucus. Would it be beneficial for the instructor to set up different scenarios for the adaptive learning scenarios? Sure, and in fact, then I guess it could be handled a number of different ways. I don't know, Jeff, do you want to weigh in on that at all, especially with virtual reality?
Let's see here.
I was just thinking with personalized learning, I guess if it, depending on the topic, but you could have a number of different scenarios under one topic. It really depends on what your goal is and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it really depends on what the simulation would be. I think what the instructors could do maybe is set up their own paths, so they could possibly make an easy, a medium, and a hard path. And that might make things easier on a personalized learning side. But yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So we'll mark that answered. And then Nathaniel Powers had a question: what are tools you use for VR and augmented development?
Yep. So we use the Unity game engine for our VR simulations. And we also use Blender for 3D modeling, Photoshop for texturing. And we also use other tools for source control like Stash and Git to keep all of our files kind of in sync with all of our developers. And as far as augmented reality, you can also do that in Unity. And there's free packages that you can download from the asset store that can get you started. And we haven't really gotten too far into augmented reality yet, but we're going to be developing some simulations here soon.
All right, great. Thanks, Jeff. There's another question here. What applications have you seen in soft skills training, such as leadership skill or interpersonal skills using newer technologies? I like the way this person is thinking. Definitely soft skills and some of the topics they mentioned would be really valuable as some sort of adaptive learning environment or courseware. I don't know of anything specifically for soft skills in those areas, but that would be great if that person developed a course. We will post it. We will include it as part of our materials if they let us. Now, just in general, though, we have a soft skills course that's part of our workforce development courseware. And we use some of the things that I mentioned as far as student progress. There's a student progress page that they can track. We have the multiple attempts for learning attempts in our activities that they can access. We have the digital, we have the ebook. So some of those digital tools that I mentioned are already incorporated into the courseware for our soft skills course. But it would be really exciting if someone did develop a course that had some adaptive learning pieces to it.
I think we can go back to our slide.
All right, now I'm going to leave the Q&A box. It seems like we've caught up there, and we're going to go back to the chat box and see if we can answer some of the questions there. Robert asked if there's a telephone number or email which you can reach to discuss a project. And yes, there is. We have that on the, we're going to go back so that you can see on the screen. Jeff's taking us back to our first page where you can get our contact information. He's going to take you back to our, there it is. All right, so all of you are welcome to contact either me or Jeff. Our phone numbers are listed there, as well as email. And you can feel free to contact us and we'll get back to you. If I'm not the right person or Jeff isn't the right person, we'll make sure the right team member gets in touch with you to answer your question. All right, a couple more questions over in the chat box, so we'll go ahead and look at those. One person asked, what tools are used for gamification? I think using badging and such for onboarding new employees would be interesting. What do you think? Yeah, like if your work environment has particular skills, let's say like a lot of work environments when you start a new job, they definitely want you to have a particular safety skill. And so usually your new job training has some kind of safety course. So you could, to encourage them to get those, or whatever incentive you want to build into it, you could have a badge that says, I have my safety badge, or if you, let's say it's a grocery store, if you want them to be cross-trained in a couple of different departments, then they could earn badges for, you know, and to indicate that they've been trained and they can work in the deli department, they can work as a cashier, they can work as a, you know, as a stock clerk, whatever, you know, whatever your goals are. That's just an example. But I think that would be definitely a great use for, and so you can encourage employees to gain more skills in your workplace, if that, you know, that's a goal that you have for them and for your business. That's a great idea. And then you could even have a leaderboard in the workroom showing the people with the, you know, that have the most badges. So there's a lot of that's, you know, there are a lot of things you could do with that. Great question. Zach Trebukis asked, can you give an example of analytic metrics that you would track for personalized learning? Analytic metrics that you would track for personalized learning. So I can't answer this in detail because I don't. I'm not as familiar with the analytics metrics as our developer colleague is, but I would say that just in kind of general, using analytics, and I don't know if I'm answering this correctly, but if you're using analytics to track student performance. So if you have a course that tracks what the student is doing in the course, then that you can find, that can show the student progress, that can show how well they're doing in the course, and you know, ideally, the more you can automate that and make that analytics measurement richer, so that you can just go to the page and it will automatically show you kind of the 3 most important things that you need to know about their performance. You know, like how many videos have they watched, how many questions have they answered incorrectly. Like I showed you earlier on the PowerPoint, there was a little snapshot of different things. How many attempts did they take to answer, you know, a particular quiz? You know, if there are 13 attempts to answer to get a quiz right, then that indicates maybe that student's struggling with that content and maybe needs some help. So I don't know if I answered that specifically enough, but please feel free to contact us and we can have a more in-depth conversation. Maybe I can help provide some better details for that. All right, these are all really great questions. I really appreciate all the questions that people are asking. It's keeping us on our toes, but hopefully we have given you a little bit of a better understanding of personalized learning. I keep signing off and we have more questions, so I will wait just a few more minutes before we say goodbye and see if there are any more questions that come through. All right. Well, I think we're all done. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you in our next webinar. Take care and have a great week.